economic development. And it's important for us to recognize that along that same path of what other organizations are important and who we spend a lot of time aligning ourselves and reaching out to and keeping strong relationships is the Hampton Roads Economic Development Association, the former name, HREDA, you all might remember that. And it's now the Hampton Roads Alliance. And we are so fortunate to have my friend and colleague, Doug Smith, with us, who is the president and CEO of the Alliance. And I've known Doug for years. We've worked together, we've partnered on issues, and I'm just thrilled that he is joining us today because the role that he and the Alliance play in these very important issues where the Realtor organization also has a presence is really critical to all of Hampton Roads. And so I'm not going to make a huge, long introduction because he has an impressive background, but I will share with you that Doug, UVA guy, you can't see me, but I am wearing my UVA hat in his honor, wahoo wah. But Doug has served in many roles throughout the Hampton Roads communities, including a former member of Portsmouth City Council, former city manager for the city of Norfolk, former assistant city manager for the city of Virginia Beach, economic development director. He has really become a focal point and quite an influencer in Hampton Roads. And he is a Hampton Roads native. He was born and raised in Portsmouth and still lives on the south side of Hampton Roads. So he is out and about. People know him. People seek his input. They value his counsel and his advice. And I think you'll see, once he finishes his presentation today, you will really see the connection that we always try to make with our role as a business entity within the Hampton Roads community and the connection we have to economic development and the importance of housing and all of that. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton on to Doug Smith, who I know you'll all enjoy. He's just such a great person, and I'm so fond of him, and I hope that you guys will share my fondness of Doug when we're all said and done here in about an hour. So Douglas, it's all yours.
Well, Susan, thank you. And that was one of my favorite introductions. That was fun. Thank you. Susan is a dear friend, and we have known each other a long time. And what we talked about was she asked me to give you all an overview of the Alliance, kind of who we are, what we do. I'm going to do that by providing a little bit of context about how economic development works in Virginia. And so you do a lot of people playing in this space, but we do it in a very collaborative way. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that, get into the organization itself, kind of what drives us and what we focus on, and we're very, as Susan said, a very different organization today than we were 3 or 4 years ago. So I want you to kind of understand what that means. And then I'm going to wrap up with, we'll throw out 4 or 5 topics that I think are big opportunities for the region that will certainly impact the growth of our region. And would love to have, I love the convenience of these Zoom presentations. They make interaction hard, and then these presentations are usually more fun if we can have some interaction, but we'll do the best we can there. I'm going to share my screen and let's see, pop up a little PowerPoint for you here, just for those of you that are on the phone. I apologize, but
Doug, if you want to send that to me, and I'll be sure to send it out to the association, and that will be something they can reference.
All right, that'd be happy to. So who can I see right now? Deborah and Anthony, can y'all just give me a thumbs up that you can see this slide? All right, beautiful. All right. So just what I said, I'm going to give you some context of how the state, regional, and local folks work together. Talk to you a little bit about what drives us as an organization, the progress I think we've made in the last 3 or 4 years, and then I'll close with some things that I think are big opportunities for the region. You probably know this, but it's worth revisiting. There is the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, is the state's version of the Alliance. there's 18 organizations like the Alliance around the state, regional organizations. And then you have each locality that has an economic development office. And we interact with all of these folks and some others, as I'll talk through with you in a moment. The Virginia Economic Development Partnership, for those of you that have been in this space for a little while, will know that they were a struggling organization 5 or 6 years ago. JLARC had done a pretty damning analysis of some things that they'd done. They hired a really sharp gentleman named Stephen Morey from Louisiana, who came up and really got them in the right space and focusing on the right things. So if you look at, for those of you that can see, there's a dial on the right that talks about all of our state level partners. I won't get into a lot of detail with all of these, but you know that we do a lot of interacting with the Virginia Port Authority. I'm actually in the same building with them. Go Virginia, the growth and opportunity organization that has really put a lot of money in the regions for economic development. Happy to talk about that. Susan's and my good friend Barry Duvall runs the Virginia Chamber. We do a lot of interaction with them. And then the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, I'm going to talk to you. They are really the group that markets the Commonwealth outside of Virginia. I would tell you that they have spent, unfortunately, Virginia has spent very little money on marketing over the years. I would tell you that Hampton Roads has spent very little time on marketing, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit. And I think it's a problem for us. A lot of people want to talk about the name of the region, and I always say that we'll never know if Hampton Roads was a good name or not because we didn't spend 50 cents trying to make it stick. I mean, we really literally have spent no money marketing the area outside. We, VEDP and our organization recognize that really the majority of your economic growth comes from existing businesses. And so you've seen a real switch in the last several years of both of our organizations spending a lot of time helping the businesses that are here grow. To do all of that, you really have to have a robust research arm. And I would tell you that Stephen Morey and his successor, Jason Elkoubi, have put a lot of energy into what they call economic competitiveness. And I'll talk about that in a minute. VEDP does a great deal with trade development and their valet program, which helps Virginia businesses learn how to export their goods and services, has been a really effective program. They do something we do not do, which is they have performance-based incentives. It's really the local governments and the state that offer incentives to companies, and I'll touch on that. And obviously their role is to work with all of these partners in the region. Let's see. There we go. Their goals, it's just, it's mom and apple pie, right? It's you want a robust economy in the state. You want to make sure that every one of those 18 regions, give or take, is successful. Stephen spent a lot of time focused on this idea of best state for business. And I popped over here this got a lot of attention over the last 30 or 60 days. With CNBC is one of the big rankings, and Virginia for 2 years in a row was #1, the top state for business. This year we were third, and lots of hand wringing over that. But I would tell you third is still pretty darn strong. They want to be the best economic development organization, best state group, and I would tell you they've gone a long way toward making that happen. But then this is a team sport, and you do it by really collaborating among organizations, and a big emphasis for theirs. Real quickly, and I don't expect you to, this is a little bit of an eye chart, but we focus a lot on what we call target industries. And the idea, particularly for the Alliance, but also for the state, is you want to focus on companies that are selling their goods and services outside of your region, outside of Virginia, because that's what grows the economic pie. Bringing in another law firm, another accounting firm to simply divvy up the current economic pie is not what we're focusing on. I'll talk about our target industries in a minute, but information technology, transportation and logistics, manufacturing, and then emerging industries like unmanned systems, personalized medicine are among the 14 targets that the state has. I talked a little bit about improving economic competitiveness. y'all will appreciate this as realtors. One of the challenges Virginia and Hampton Roads have had is product. We have not had adequate development ready sites for these companies, these manufacturing and logistics companies to come in. It's been a big challenge for Hampton Roads, and I'll talk about what we're doing to change that. Obviously, improving the competitiveness right on down to the local level. Broadband has gotten a ton of attention, rightly so, of trying to make sure that everybody really that access to the internet effectively is just a basic need of every community, and then a lot of conversation about sort of how they will improve the organization itself. In parallel to that, our organization, we market the Hampton Roads region. We talk about the workforce and the talent and the opportunity here. We spend a lot of time collaborating among the Workforce Council, the Chambers of Commerce, Reinvent Hampton Roads. And so I think over the years, there's been criticism of you've got a lot of these organizations, who does what. We've spent a lot of time the last 4 or 5 years really making sure that these organizations work well together and each one understands its swim lane. We also spend a lot of time on making sure that we understand what makes this region competitive. We're a facilitator, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit. We really facilitate the decision-making process. At the end of the day, the localities, Williamsburg, James City County, whoever it happens to be, they close the deal. They tend to own the property. They tend to provide the incentives. Again, we're spending a lot of time on existing businesses, and I touched on that research idea. Local government. So again, every locality has an economic development office. They're the ones that in the conversations we're having that close the deal. They help the company guide through the planning process, the zoning process, whatever the city. As you all know, these cities complex. These processes are all a little bit different. They're all complicated. We do a lot of travel. I'm heading to Chicago tomorrow to talk to some site consultants. We take the local folks with us to this trip. We're going to have some local representatives along with Dominion Energy and Russ Young from the port. And then we serve the local government ultimately is that principal point of contact once that business lands. Another little bit of an eye chart, but I just want you to understand how much is involved in economic development, and we all overlap a little bit, but we're pretty clear on who has the lead in these different activities. And I would tell you, we work really well together today in a way that we didn't necessarily 5 or 10 years ago. This is so a lot of what I'm talking about right now is site selection. It's companies that are looking from out of the market to come into this area. A lot of their work is done before we ever even know they're looking at us. And one of the things we learned is we oftentimes don't make a short list, and we never even know there's a search going on because a short list has been developed before anybody. It's so easy now to do your research from your desk in Chicago or your desk in Hamburg that we've got to make sure that we're telling our story and positioning ourselves well. So that company, oftentimes a site consultant that's working with that company starts to talk about, they'll do a request for information or start to gather information. Generally, oftentimes they're looking at multiple states. So they reach out first at the state level, in our case to VEDP, who then sends the opportunity out to the regions. They don't necessarily send it to every region. They'll send it to the regions that they think have the sites that are available or the buildings that are available. And when we get those, we do the same thing. We've got an inventory of all the sites that are available. We determine what we think are the suitable opportunities. We make sure all the localities know what we're sending in, and then we work with that locality to try to advance that project forward. So that's the process. The model the old model that we used to follow was really only working on those kinds of projects, only doing business attraction. And I would just tell you that the rest of the world, certainly the country, but the rest of the world, really 20 years ago, started understanding that that right column. This is a column this is a graphic I like that the Brookings Institute uses. Economic development is much more than just trying to market your region to companies moving. You've got to make sure that you have the workforce and talent available. You've got to make sure that you've got an innovative economy that values and nurtures entrepreneurship. We talk a lot about, transportation around here, and I would argue we've come a long way with, we have the largest transportation project in the country underway right now, $5 billion of projects underway. So we're solving in large part our transportation challenges, but that infrastructure has got to get fixed, and it's more than just transportation. Talked about sites, but there's a lot that goes into economic development, and I would just argue that as a region, we didn't grasp that until probably 5 or 6 years ago. So our organization changed. Our mission is really just what I said, to work collaboratively within the region, but also with the state, to make sure that we're attracting and growing companies, and that we have the talent to provide those companies. Talent is, and I'll come back to talent a few times. It is the key to everything in terms of whether or not you're going to be successful in attracting a business. So you can see the services that we do there. We provide the research, the market analysis. Well, again, we help with the site identification. We serve that role as a single point of contact, so somebody's not having to come in here and talk to 13 different localities. We try to connect them to the right attorneys, the right banks, sometimes the right realtors. We obviously, I talked about assisting in business expansion, and we try to market the area. Just to give you a sense of who we are, we were, y'all will appreciate this, we were a 70-member board a couple of years ago. It is unwieldy, right? And so we've revamped the board. We changed the mission of the organization a little bit. So the board today is 6 mayors. The 5 largest communities, they put the most money in. It's about $1 per capita that the communities put in. So those 6 mayors are on our board, and then rotating among the smaller communities happens to be Dick Grice from Isle of Wight right now. And then the business community is really C-suite execs from the region. So our chair right now is Bill Ermatinger from Huntington Ingalls. You can see Keith Vandervennet from Ferguson. And you can see the other folks from Town Bank, Cox, the Port of Virginia. Diane Leopold is the Chief Operating Officer at Dominion Energy. I'm going to talk in a minute about energy. We think that is a really challenging dynamic for Hampton Roads, and having her on the board has really been helpful. The other big change we made, I would argue that Hampton Roads has ceded economic development to the public sector over the last 25 or 30 years. And I think really to our detriment, in that nobody gets elected to represent the region, right? And so the private sector really has to step up and drive that. And that's a big change we've made in the last 2 or 3 years. Our private funding has gone from about $500,000 to almost $2 million. And so we've got eight organizations, from the Port Authority to Centerra to Town Bank, Dollar Tree, that give us $100,000 a year, and about 60 others that give us anywhere from 5 to 100. The important thing there is getting that engagement and that awareness and input from the business community. Our work is driven by 2 documents. We negotiated. I was, as Susan said, I was the city manager in Norfolk, frankly, when we did the relaunch, and we negotiated with among ourselves and with the private sector a master agreement that every locality signed, and I'll talk about it in a second, that lays out what we will do and what the localities will do. And then my predecessor was a guy named Rick Weddle, who was really sharp. And he brought a group in from IBM to really do an analysis of the region and talk about what we should be doing, in that new model. And that has really driven our activities these last 3 or 4 years. And the 4 headlines there were: you've got to be driving regional, you, the Alliance, have got to be driving regional collaboration. You're only going to be successful if the region collaborates. You've got to have a very clear targeted industry strategy, and everything you need to do, needs to focus on that. You've got limited resources, so you've got to get a much more effective social media campaign relative to marketing, and I'll talk about that. And then you've got to, nobody's making a decision that's not based on good in-depth data, and so that market intelligence is the 4th piece. IBM came in and just what I said, you know what, you're chasing an old model. You've got to change that model. You've got to shift to really a focus on continuous growth, prosperity and inclusion. But the top right bucket, and unfortunately it hasn't changed much, said that, the challenges are you're underperforming as a region. There are 53 regions that are 1 million people or more. Right before the pandemic, Hampton Roads ranked 53rd for job growth, 53 out of 53. So you've got it. We have had a very sluggish economy for the last several years, and this is before COVID. And without some sort of significant disruption, that's not going to change. And so that's what IBM. We all knew this, but IBM came in and said you've got to do things differently if you want to see different results. So the summary there is we were an organization that focused on drawing folks from outside of the market. We still do, but really now we spend a lot more time actively marketing the region, playing that role of primary contact, helping our indigenous growth for our internal companies, playing that role of facilitator. And this is a little bit where Susan and I get to see one another. There's also a lot of policy advocacy that we try to support in terms of things that are happening at both the local and state level. And then one of the things we were not doing very well that we're trying to do is spend time after somebody lands here, making sure that they are growing and being successful. So what have we done since all of that? And I'll do this pretty quickly. Again, go back to those 4 headlines that IBM said. The first one was advanced competitiveness through regional collaboration. I hope you've seen some of this. The poster there with the 7571 region was the 757 Recovery and Resilience Action Framework that we really drove along with the chambers and a lot of other organizations to help Hampton Roads bounce back from COVID a little quicker. I'll touch on that on the next slide. We've done a lot of work to, and when I say we, it really is the Alliance, the Planning District Commission, the TPO, the Reinvent Hampton Roads, the port, really working. There's a lot of federal money flowing right now, and making sure that our congressional delegation understands what our priorities are, making sure that Hampton Roads gets its opportunity at some of that money is really important. And you're seeing that pay off. You saw Norfolk get $250 million for flood protection. You've seen the state announce that we're going to get the money, it looks like, to finish the 64 gap. You saw the Hampton Roads Workforce Council just got an $11 million grant for workforce development. So we're trying to make sure that we get our fair share of that money. I'm going to talk about this regional energy plan in a moment in a little more detail. Fun for us is we've got some folks in market, Steve Harrison that works for us, Jim Noel, who just retired from York County, that have been the past 2 presidents of the Virginia Economic Developers Association. So we're players at the state level. And then the exciting news for us and for folks on this call is James City County, Williamsburg, and York County were not members of the Alliance. And in December of last year, they joined the Alliance, and they are members today. And so we're enjoying working with those communities and helping to grow those economies. And it's fun for me to get, frankly, it's been a lot of years since I worked up in those markets, and glad to be back up there. The framework that I talked about is really a playbook for economic recovery. There are 5 pillars in that: regional unity, job growth, talent growth, economic resilience, and regional infrastructure. There were a couple of hundred people that got pretty involved in developing that during COVID. There are 30 programs with very specific metrics. There's a website called 757recovery.com that lays out, you can also get there by looking at our website, lays out what those programs are and the progress that we've made. There's a public facing dashboard that says, what we've done around each of those accountabilities on those 30 programs. So it's, again, another example of that regional collaboration. I talked about this regional energy assessment when the Atlantic Coast Pipeline was the gas pipeline that was going to come into Hampton Roads, and about 2 years now, Dominion Energy and Duke and the folks that were driving that walked away from that for a lot of reasons. It didn't seem like it was going to get the permits that it needed, and they had spent a lot of money. And that was, for us, from an economic development standpoint, that was a bit of a gut punch. I'm going to talk about site development. We have 50 key sites in Virginia, in Hampton Roads, about 130 in Virginia, that were counting on the gas from that pipeline to use for development and use for manufacturing processes. And so we don't have that gas coming in now. And so we've got to figure out how to overcome that. And so we got a grant from Go Virginia to do an analysis. We hired a group out of Denver called PA Consulting that's really looking at what is the energy, what are the sources that are coming in from natural gas to offshore wind. What are the portfolio of options that you're going to have going forward, and what's the demand going to look like? And so we will work through that process this fall, but we're going to be a lot smarter about what our challenges are and what our realities are. We talked about target industries a little bit, and we've never done well. The state has never been what's the best word? It's just never been effective at bringing us office prospects. And I think part of that is we haven't told our story very well. So we brought a group in, Wadley Donovan, who's a site consultant, to help us develop an office strategy that we could share with the state. Unfortunately, we finished that as COVID hit. So, the office market is, we had Wadley Donovan in just last week looking at, all right, what's still relevant, what's happening with the office market. And it's if you know what's happening with the office market, I'd love for you to explain it to me, because I think it's still to be determined, how all this remote work is going to play out, and how far that pendulum is going to swing, and what does the office space look like, and what is the demand going to look like. But excuse me, we have some very good product in Hampton Roads, from Dollar Tree Summit Point project to Town Center in Virginia Beach to the Tech Center up in Newport News. And William and Mary's got some really interesting plans for a research village in Williamsburg. And so it's really important that we understand what our office opportunities and our niche are going to be. We've done a lot of work trying to better understand robotics and the plant and the impact that it's going to have on manufacturing. And then we're spending a lot of time on offshore wind. Offshore wind is a generational opportunity for Hampton Roads. There will be $100 billion of offshore wind development, excuse me, off of the East Coast in the coming years. Dominion Energy is developing the largest project off the East Coast. They've already got the first 2 turbines in federal waters. There is every reason that Hampton Roads should be the supply chain hub for that industry, not just helping to build it, but helping with the operations and maintenance. And if you think about who we are, what's in our DNA, we have been building, complicated aircraft carriers and submarines and the like for generations, for decades. And that workforce and those skill sets transfer nicely to these massive turbines. We also have a unobstructed access to the ocean. We're not dealing with the bridges that others are dealing with. And we've got, excuse me, some sites that are identified as among the best on the East Coast. That should easily give us 5,000 to 10,000 new jobs, and we can in the coming years. Excuse me. In terms of the recruitment, the industries that we're going after are information technology, offshore wind, shared services, distribution and logistics, food and beverage, and advanced manufacturing. I think I touched on most of this on offshore wind. The other piece we're doing is really trying to promote the region. And I talked about this a few minutes ago. We're going to spend a couple $100,000 on our promotion. This region ought to be spending $3 to $5 million. We just went down to Charlotte. Charlotte's got a pretty effective program that they're spending $4 million a year marketing the city and the region. They're going to double that. If you've probably seen the ads in different venues, we have got to start telling our story in a more significant way if we're going to truly bring folks, companies, and individuals into this market, and would love to talk about that when we're done. But with that said, we're trying to be very directed through social media. There's really interesting things you can do with social media that allow you to really target very specific markets and very specific individuals in those markets. So we've developed a new brand. We've worked with a local agency called Sway to develop this Every Business Needs an Ally campaign. And we're seeing a lot of success with that, but not moving the needle nearly as much as we need to be. I don't know what to call what we're in right now. I don't think post-COVID, as an office that had most of us with COVID last last week, but I don't have a I don't have a better term, but from a marketing perspective, these are the things that we're trying to do going forward, which is really build name recognition for the Alliance, to keep those companies, those high wage, high salary companies that are here, and cultivate the reputation of this region. That's really within the market. And I think we have a lot of work to do to build regional unity. Outside, again, we're trying to work on that name and brand recognition, but at the end of the day, it's really about generating leads from those domestic and international companies. Just what you'd expect in terms of who we focus on in market. It's the localities that are members of the Alliance. Domestically, it's really targeting the Northeast, those places where we have direct flights, those places, frankly, where we have some advantages, oftentimes in operating costs, and those markets that are within a reasonable drive. You know, if you're in a 5 hours or so at this point, I think folks will jump in the car more readily than getting on a plane with the travel hassles that we have. And then internationally, we're really focused on Europe and Germany, France, Netherlands, Spain, United Kingdom. We've had some conversation about China, but really not going there with much energy right now. This just tells you kind of who we go after. We've got about 5,500 business leaders in the market that we try to keep up with. Those are business owners, C-suite executives. In those markets that I talked about, we're targeting the C-suite, the COOs, the CEOs, the chief financial officers. One of the things we haven't done that we need to do going forward is focus on the HR directors, the human resources directors. And part of what you're learning is talent is such a challenge for everybody. The real estate deals are really becoming talent deals. And it's the human resource director is really the one driving corporate relocation, because they're the ones that determine whether or not the talent is in the market. There are a lot of consultants that work in this space, and so we target those folks as well. And then the final one was just that market intelligence piece. I talked a little bit about site readiness. We've spent a lot of time, and I'll touch on that in a moment. We've done a DE&I review of every one of our members to understand sort of who's really starting to get those programs in place effectively. And you can see the list of other studies that we've done. In a given year, we'll do about 175 pieces of analysis for the localities or for our investors. A little more detail, because I think this is fun for you all on the real estate side of things. We really led the state in this idea of analyzing your sites over 100 acres. And the reality is, it's not enough to have a site. You've got to have it has to be development ready. These folks want to be able to get to market quickly. And we didn't even have a good list of the sites, much less what it would take to get them in the stream of commerce. And so now every one of those sites, you can see that we evaluated 72 sites over 25 acres. We can tell you exactly what needs to happen to get that site into a development ready status. 6 sites of those 72, frankly, were moved to that certified level. We got about $4.5 million from Go Virginia to work on 5 more sites. I'm going to talk about this again in a minute, but every time a big project lands somewhere, an automotive manufacturer, a chip manufacturer, whatever, I'll tend to get an email. Hey, were we in the running for that? Why didn't we get that project? And the answer is always, we didn't have the land. We weren't looked at. And so Chesapeake has a piece of property owned by a farmer named Frank Williams that is 4,000 acres in Chesapeake and 1,000 acres in North Carolina. It is a game-changing opportunity. It's the kind of site that it could accommodate 10 to 20,000 jobs for the right kind of facility, and then the supplier farm that will come up to support all of that. So this is a really, and Chesapeake is in the process of rezoning 1,400 acres. That will have an enormous impact on the entire region. So I'll wrap up, and then I'll throw you sort of 5 big ideas or big concepts that are going our way. I just want you to know, new organization with a new mission and leadership and a very clear plan. We've implemented the recommendations that IBM gave to us. We think we're regionally relevant at this point, but there is an opportunity to certainly do much more. These are I think I ended up doing 6 things that I think are facing the region right now, that some we've got our arms around, some we don't, but I think all are potentially transformational. One is this idea of being an inclusive region, a place where folks from outside of the region can see their place. And I would argue that Hampton Roads is a very diverse region. We're not a particularly inclusive region. And so there's a lot of conversation about what does that mean and what does that look like? And the chambers of commerce are really driving a lot of those conversations. Susan and I talked a lot about housing, which is obviously near and dear to you all. I don't see us having a regional conversation about housing. I see locality by locality. But I think there's got to be a conversation about not just affordable housing, but executive housing. There was a great podcast the Wall Street Journal did a couple of days about Pella Windows. Pella Windows is apparently headquartered in, I think it's Iowa. It is truly the factory town, and they want to add hundreds of jobs in a new facility, and they don't have they don't have the housing or the childcare to take care of the people they would move in. They are literally developing a housing subdivision so that company has taken it on themselves. So I don't think it's an issue that's unique to Hampton Roads, but it's one that I think really need to spend some time talking about not how does Williamsburg address it or how does Virginia Beach address it, but how does the region tackle this issue? And I'd be curious to hear y'all's thoughts, but I don't see a regional conversation happening along those lines. I touched on the Williams Farm. I think that's an absolute game changer for us. Jefferson Lab is in the running for a $500 million supercomputer around data. So that changes this region relative to data science, and could be an opportunity to really bring some high skill, high wage work. And that will have huge ramifications for William & Mary and Old Dominion. Talked about the Regional Energy Master Plan. I think talent is the most important, is talked about as the most important challenge regions have. If you don't have the energy to support development, then it doesn't matter. You aren't going to develop the jobs. And then I mentioned offshore wind. If we can tackle these things, and we will, I really do believe we will, then we have an opportunity to really transform this region and take it from the 53rd out of 53 for job growth up into the top echelon. All right, so that's my close. Every business needs an ally. We are yours. I'm going to stop this share. I apologize for swallowing a bug. That was tough. But we'd love to get comments or questions.
Well, you know that I am full of comments and questions about this, Doug, because this is what just jazzes me so much, because I always do try to insert housing into whatever the conversation may be, housing and rooftops and jobs and impact on transportation, impact on education. We touch everything. And what I love that you brought up part of our discussion that you and I shared about there is not a regional conversation around housing. And we have 3 local associations of realtors, which all work together, one on the south side, then the peninsula, and then Williamsburg, and we all collaborate. We all, join forces and work together. But whether I'm at the Planning District Commission or the Hampton Roads Legislative Caucus or whatever the subject is or the purpose of a meeting, it really is more focused on, well, this community, this locality, that locality. But the whole idea of marketing Hampton Roads as a region very much does need to include the salient point of what do we do about housing? You mentioned with offshore wind, which I love. Doug and I worked on that together, in fact, and I represented the company for many years that was Dominion's partner on getting those 2 turbines into the ocean. And so I just have a soft spot for offshore wind. but we've got 5 to 10,000 potential jobs. If the Williams Farm project really goes the way we all want it to, well, there's an additional 10 to 12, if not 20,000 jobs. I mean, we could have 30,000 people needing housing who are currently not here, or who might be moving from the rental market or moving up into the sales market from one home to the other. What do we do about that delta in where are people going to live if they're coming here to work?
Am I wrong? Are y'all here? What are y'all hearing about? And I know y'all are hearing it every day. What are y'all hearing? And is there a broader conversation that A, should take place, or B, is taking place?
Now, Lynn, I don't know if you're in the position to maybe give some perspective on, the ongoing inventory challenge, because I do think that's where the discussions have been starting, and candidly, the impact on the current economic situation, call it recession, inflation, both. But Lynn, if you as a practicing realtor and the president of the association caller, I think that would really be helpful. And then Doug, we can maybe go back to your question of where do we begin that regional conversation as Hampton Roads?
Well, right now, Susan, thanks. Right now, all over the place. I checked the rain stats. I've checked the Williamsburg stats. We still are holding at about less than 2 months worth of inventory. It was about 1.7 the last update I did last week, and that was generic all around. I commented this morning to someone that I keep saying price reductions, and it has been so many months since we've seen price reductions, other than a occasional wild one. But you're seeing on MLS, or you're seeing through your emails, you're seeing 3 and 4 price reductions almost every day. So there's a low inventory, but the market seems to have stabilized in terms of numbers of people who are buying. And some of that stabilization comes from the interest rates rising. And the interest rates rising, of course, are a reaction to the Fed increasing, and all of the information that we're getting about we are apparently in the beginning of a recession. 2 months worth of a failure of the GDP to grow always throws us into recession talk. So there's not a lot of inventory, and the people who need to buy or was planning to buy are being very cautious because of the interest rate rise. So it's almost like a really bad cycle right now. Having been in this business, as long as I have, this is not the first rodeo I've been through with this, and we do come out. But right now, those are just the realities of what's going on in the entire region. And I hope that made sense. I think it kind of rambled, but I hope it made sense.
That made a lot of sense. I mean, it's hard to get your arms around. It's a very strange economy. Did any of you all attend the governor's conversation yesterday in Williamsburg?
No, I did not. For some reason, I wasn't aware of it, or I would have.
Yeah, I didn't either. So it was apparently I guess what is Terry Banez's group, the GWP chamber. So Cliff Fleet facilitated a conversation, and a couple hundred people there. Nancy Gurdon, who works with me, said the governor talked about insufficient housing, lack of inventory as a reason that Virginia is seeing the outmigration that it is, which I thought was an interesting. And I may be quoting Nancy wrong, who may be quoting him wrong, so I don't want to say, but it was he talked apparently a fair bit about housing. So I was just curious if anybody heard that directly.
Well, that would not surprise me, because we keep hearing about people moving, and I know you've talked a little bit about areas around us. One of the conversations or comments you made me think about the triangle in Raleigh, Durham, Cary, all that area, the research triangle. They work so hard on education at the North Carolina state level to train kids in the STEM programs. And some of this comes back from the years that I spent on the Newport News Education Foundation. But they work very hard to train kids on STEM so that when they get their college degree, they come back to the research triangle to work. That has kept the North Carolina housing prices fairly stable, and even when most of the areas had a big drop, 2008 through 10, because of the mortgage situation, they did not have a bad situation there. I have some friends in the market down there, and their market stayed pretty stable. Their housing prices are stable, and they seem to have a lot of building growth. I mean, it's amazing how much building growth they have in that area. And I don't know how those fit, but I know their state taxes are much more friendly for people who have retirement income. And that could be anywhere, people from 55 to 65 or 70. And a lot of people are relocating to the North Carolina, South Carolina area, not moving far away, but just moving a little bit because of the tax situation. And that, I think, does come into play. And it's not something that seems to be acknowledged at the state level as much as maybe there should be more conversation about that.
I think you're spot on.
Can't hear me. And so, it's interesting, Doug, because I guess Lynn seems like it was longer than last week, but I think it was last week. Both Lynn and I attended the Virginia Realtors Public Policy Committee, which is the state association legislative committee, for lack of a better description. Right. And we are fairly certain that there will be a lens put on the housing situation in the Commonwealth by the General Assembly. What that's going to look like, I don't think we know yet. But I do know that the realtors are having those conversations with the builders. What do we need to do in terms of unlocking opportunities? What do we need to do about reducing regulatory burdens that impede the ability for housing to come onto the market? Those are taking place, and maybe within that greater conversation, we need to be starting that conversation in the region. And between Doug and Susan, and you all have heard from Bob Crum at the Planning District Commission, all of us together maybe can start that conversation. I'm just, I think it's still, there's so many different facets. It's chicken and the egg. Do we have the inventory and hope that people will have the jobs here, jobs come, and then we build around that? I'm not sure how it all fits together, but I think in any economic development growth discussion, concept of housing needs to be taking place within those.
And Susan, when we look at I would imagine the governor and his comments, I really do wish I had known about that, because I definitely would have gone. But I'm sure with his comments, he's also thinking about the tremendous surplus that the Commonwealth has, and that might fit in very well with the conversation that we had at Public Policy about how do we stimulate people buying houses, both at the beginning level as well as people putting their homes on the market, so that they can buy up or down depending on their life circumstances, and we can have more inventory in the process. It is really just a big circle, and you have to get in somewhere in order to start the stimulation of the market. But everybody's hesitant about where we jump in. And I wish my crystal ball was really finely tuned. But apparently it's not. I have no idea where that jump in point is.
Well, and Doug, that's a question for you. Where do we jump in? And then I hear that it sounded almost like kind of like Chris. But we'll get to the other question that I didn't intend to hop over. But Doug, where could we as the association, and I'll include BPAR, I represent the association too. Where can those organizations start to take the lead on working with the Alliance, chambers? How can we be helpful to you all as you're out there doing the scoping of who could potentially be coming to Hampton Roads with fresh ideas and some of these 6 big ideas that you've talked about?
So a couple of places, a couple of things. One, you all are living this stuff every day, right? So you're seeing just what Len said of price reductions or inventory challenge, whatever it is. And so you're, and that interaction is immediate. You know, where the rest of us are kind of reading about it after the fact in the paper and starting to see trends. And it's just not on it's not on my radar the way it is on your radar, right? There's a couple of organizations, Reinvent Hampton Roads, I mentioned Nancy Gurdon's group, is really the strategy side of the house. And so it'll be interesting to see. So I think, Susan, one place, if you all came in and said, boy, you know, here are the issues around housing, here are the challenges, we think the region ought to be having a conversation, I think Nancy would be a good person to plug in. And the other one would be Bob Crum at the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. And they also both have that regional footprint. And sometimes it's as simple as hosting a conversation. You know, Breeden is the apartment developer, is an investor with us, and Tim Faulkner, who's the president down there. And I've talked about should the Alliance have a just a conversation, host an event where we talk about this stuff and see kind of what people are hearing and doing, and see what comes out of that. Nothing says that you all couldn't have that conversation. So some of this is just getting some people from different perspectives in a room and having some conversation and identifying what the challenge is, and then we figure out, you know, what the solutions are. But until you have that conversation, I don't think you'll solve anything or change anything.
Hi, this is Suzanne speaking. One of the things that I've been seeing is, you know, we can bring all the jobs in, but if the people who are at the support level and the lower level can't afford to live here, then you know, we shoot ourselves in the foot.
That's right. That's right.
We need affordable housing. That's right. A huge component of making this work.
Yeah, one of the biggest problems for this is Seth Vasquez with Remax Capital. Can you folks hear me?
Yes.
Okay. One of the biggest problems I'm hearing from builders is that inflation is causing inflation on materials is too high. So buying material and building, there's no profit in it at this time for them. So they're holding off until material comes to a good price to build.
I have heard the same. The material cost. So I'll back up. This is again, but to loop that particular observation, it was today's Thursday, so I think it was Tuesday. The National Home Builders released its monthly builder developer confidence report, sort of similar to what the consumer confidence statistics will frame. But this particular report is based on what are builders feeling in this marketplace. And between a difficult time in accessing capital because of the risk, inflation and rates, and material costs as well as labor costs, it was the 8th consecutive month of deflated builder confidence. The longest trend we've seen at that lack of confidence level since 2007. And so the material cost is very much part of the overall conversation of how do we build more housing, affordable, middle class, high-end executive housing. If your costs are going to be high because of supply chain, you're going to have a difficult time getting access to housing. And if the interest rates go up, buyers should be on the sideline. If builders are facing a situation of how do I help to increase inventory when economics are such that they just can't make numbers. So there is a definite problem that we're staring at, where again, we, along with the builders, are having some of those conversations. But I think, Doug, your idea of, you know, whether it's around the table or in more of a public setting, where it could be the realtors, the alliance, and the planning district, host a meeting to initiate that conversation. I mean, that could be an immediate action item as a result of our conversation.
Susan, I really would like, I'm driving and I can't write down those names, but I know you know who they are. If you will save that for me, I think we need more conversation on putting together something Doug has suggested. And we'll see if we can't pick up that ball and run with it. One of the conversations that I was in not too long ago, our country is 4.5 million housing units short because of what's happened over the past few years between the pandemic and the building prices and all that. So if we're 4.5 million new construction units short right now, that number is just going to increase.
Yeah, you are right.
So
I'm
Lynn,
hearing it through hang on.
Lynn, have you seen that number for Virginia or for Hampton Roads?
No, I haven't. I got that from the national perspective, but I have not seen that. Where do you think I could go and see if I could find that?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking. And Susan, I always, with these kinds of questions, I always start with Greg Grutendorst, who's the economist over at the PDC. He's just a smart young guy. And if he doesn't know, he generally knows who knows the answer. But it'd probably be worth looping him in, because I think until you get data, right? If we talk about if all we know is the national number, until we know what the regional or the local numbers are, you're not going to get the elected leaders' attention. And I think that's ultimately what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be. I mean, we've done all kinds of studies at the Williamsburg Association on affordable housing, and we know we're so far behind for Williamsburg and James City County and York County on affordable housing. We're just horribly behind. I don't know what the other communities have done about that. But we do know that. Yeah, we spend a lot of money trying to find that out. So perhaps we could find a grant that might help us to pull together new construction issues.
So here's something that we have been talking about for several years, Doug. When you and I talked earlier, I'd even fund, but in each of our communities, and I'll say the peninsula, every locality on the save Poquoson, they are not ready to review their comprehensive plan yet. But Newport News, Hampton, York County, Isle of Wight, and then in the Williamsburg region, James City, the city of Williamsburg, County, we have engaged researchers, Dr. Tom Hall from Port on the peninsula and Dr. Sarah Stafford here at Williamsburg at William and Mary. And each of them has conducted a housing assessment to look at what's the current housing within a certain time frame, and then studying trends, pushing out what they expect the housing needs of the future will be. Just yesterday, we delivered that presentation to New Kent County, And 2 weeks ago, the Peninsula delivered a report to Isle of Wight. And we've done the same. So we're just updating that data every couple of years to start to some sales. So we're refreshing it, and so much has changed in the past year. But part of the method that madness visual communities, but once you're at the point, you're at that point now, where we can then do a regional housing assessment with Dr. Hall and Dr. Stafford. We do want to create that data set that shows the current stock and what the housing are going forward. I think we're there. And we do have grant opportunities, National Association that we secure. They know how much the two associations we work with depend on data to help drive policy. So I think we just start looking at gaining traction on a regional housing study. We can, Bob and I work, and then with you guys, and start populating that to our policy makers. And I think as well, Lynn, to your point on construction and what is the Virginia economic picture, our chief economist that's in the filters for some additional data too. So I think we definitely have, I certainly have some takeaways from this conversation that I can start working through over the course of the day, things into.
We definitely have some homework that we can do.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Doug, this has been absolutely wonderful, and I've picked up so much information from you. I apologize. I think I was the person who was making so much noise earlier in the call. Anyway, we have so enjoyed the conversation with you. You've given us a lot of ideas, a lot of homework, and wonderful, wonderful information. And I'm so excited to hear about all of the collaboration that is going on. And it's starting to be even better. So thank you so much for your time.
It was my pleasure. Enjoy being with you all. You all take care.
Thank you.
Doug, thank you so much.
Thank
We'll
you.
get it out.
Thank you.